Hey everybody, so we're live today with this interview, and just before we go live with interviewing our guest here, I'm just going to take a short while to explain how it's going to work. I do have a scripted set of questions that I will be asking our guest, and then towards the end I will verbally invite people to begin typing viewer questions. So without further ado, hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, respective of where you are in the world. My name is Mark Allard-Will and I'll be your host today. But as you can see, I am not alone. I'm joined all the way from the UK by my good friend and incredibly prolific author, Dane Cobain. Dane, can I ask you to introduce both yourself and your work to the viewers, please?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Dane Cobain. I'm a British writer. I'm currently living in High Wycombe here in the UK. How do I describe my work? That's going to be a tricky one because I tend to write a bit of everything. I mean, I've always been a super keen reader as well, so I'm sure, as Mark will explain later, I run a book review site and run a book blog, and I just read pretty widely across any genre I kind of get interested by. And I think I do something similar with my writing. So, I mean, my first book, No Rest for the Wicked, was a horror novel or a horror novella, and I've definitely written more horror since then. But I mean, I've written a poetry collection and some non-fiction and various other genres as well. So my latest release is a kind of cozy detective mysteries, but brought into the 21st century. I think actually the one thing that brings most of my work together is that it looks at technology and how technology kind of affects our life in our modern world, really. So, you know, in my first book, it was sort of science versus religion. And then I had Formerly, which is a novel about a fictitious social networking site. And more recently with Driven and the Tower Hill Terror, it's been kind of Miss Marple meets Facebook is how I'd pitch those.
Fantastic, thank you. So first things first, Dane, you're an incredibly active creator. You are, of course, an author, but you're also one of the top listed critics on Goodreads. You run a book review website called socialbookshelves.com. You're an active YouTuber, publishing regular videos, and you're a musician with 3 albums under your belt. I think I speak for all of us when I ask, what is the secret to successfully maintaining so many pursuits?
It's just to never stop, really. That's kind of, I mean, I get quite stressed out doing nothing. So you know how a lot of people, I don't know, say recently Tiger King came out. So a lot of people have been having just, you know, chilled evening in front of the television, watching Tiger King with a glass of wine. Whereas I'd be there watching it while simultaneously editing a video or working on one of my books or something. So, yeah, I mean, I do sometimes worry that I'm going to drop dead of a heart attack by the time I'm 50 because I never really stop. But I don't know, it allows me to kind of pack a lot of stuff into the day. And also multitasking is, a good strategy to develop as well.
Fantastic, thank you for that. So now your characters are very strong. Whether it's in one of your early releases, such as No Rest for the Wicked, or a later release, such as Formerly or Driven, your characters are really solidly rounded out. They have complex emotional backgrounds, strong emotional reasoning, and very, very clear individuality. How do you go about forming such 3-dimensional characters?
Well, that's a difficult one. I mean, I think a lot of that actually will come back to different writers have different approaches to writing. So you'll have Stephen King is famously what's called a pantser. So he kind of makes it up by the seat of his pants. That's actually why a lot of his endings aren't very good, because he had no ending he was working towards and it just sort of petered out. I'm kind of the other way around. So I'm more of a plotter. So most of my characters, they'll start out with just the germ of an idea. Weirdly, I find once you give them the name, a lot of the character comes from the name, which is why kind of naming characters can be so difficult. And even actually one of the harder things is minor characters, because if you get the name wrong of a minor character, it just sort of throws the whole thing off, if that makes sense. So yeah, they just sort of tend to develop over time. And again, a big part of writing is the editing process as well. So even if a character's been a little weak during the first round of edits, I work with a very talented editor called Pamela Harris. Shout out to Pam. I call her my partner in crime. And she's actually written a book herself as well, but she mostly does editing and works with a bunch of different sort of indie authors. And she's really good at highlighting areas where maybe there isn't enough characterization, or when someone does something inconsistent or something like that. So yeah, she really kind of helps me to develop them. I think the other thing as well is most of the characters are based in some way upon people in my real life. And actually, I think quite a lot of authors do this, is that I'm quite guilty of using myself, or just I'll take an element of myself and kind of hyper accentuate it. So I actually did that with both like James Lightfold and Miley O'Hara. Like Miley's more of my kind of sort of fun loving side, and like when I was like 17 and really into like rock music and all this kind of stuff. And then Lightfold's like the really sort of super obsessive, like routine driven, sort of curmudgeonly old man, I suppose. And I think I have like, I guess, both of those sides to my personality. So most of my characters, again, are based at least in part on somebody, and then, you know, you sort of build from there over time.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's I love the way you describe that, and the praise that you give to editors as well, because I can certainly attest to that myself as well with my next book, which is going to be called Siegfried Dragonslayer. I worked with an editor, Sarah Hughes, out of Toronto, and she has really showed me the parts where my story was very strong and the parts where it needed to go back to the drawing board. And yeah, just really wonderful what editors can do for a story. So before I ask my next question, could you describe to the viewers, what is Booktube?
What is Booktube? Okay, well, you can see my sign up there as well, which is a bit of a hint, because it's kind of a rip off of the YouTube logo. Booktube is, I guess, the kind of collective term for the community on YouTube that makes book-related videos. So in the same way, you know, you have book bloggers, but I don't think there's really a term for like the community of book bloggers. I've heard people talk about book Twitter, so you do get like bookish communities on different social networks. I think with YouTube, what's interesting is most people tend to, you know, you think of YouTube and you think of like maybe cat videos, or, you know, you think of really stupid comments that people leave at the bottom of videos. And that may be true for like the wider part of YouTube, but certainly the kind of people who are looking at book reviews of a Haruki Murakami novel, you know, they're probably quite sort of artsy and quite interested in books, and they want to talk about them, you know. So the Booktube community is basically a bunch of small creators. We all make videos talking about books. We watch each other's videos. We sometimes do tags where we'll have a challenge, you know, so we'll a recent one was the TBR tag, for example. So there's maybe 10 questions about the books on your TBR pile, your to be read pile, and so you can answer the questions and you'll tag your friends to do it. And it's funny you saying to me before we sort of started the interview that these interviews have helped you to make a lot of new contacts and a lot of new friends. And you know, through Booktube, I've found not only just a lot of genuinely good friends, but I found a lot of authors as well. One in particular stands out is my friend Charlie Heathcote. Mark, definitely check out his book. I think you'll enjoy it. He's got a series called Our Doris, and it's basically about this sort of cantankerous old woman called Doris and her husband Harold, and it's very much like Northern English humour, kind of in the vein of Keeping Up Appearances. Oh, and like I swear to God, this guy is like got 500 subscribers on YouTube or something, you know, 20-30 people watch his videos, and I've read his book and I'm like, this is like, that could have like serious mainstream commercial success, I think. Whereas, you know, not throwing shade at any of my other indie author friends, but quite often indie authors, they feel like indie authors. I'm sure even I do when you read my work. I don't read like I'm Dan Brown or something. So yeah, it's a great platform to make friends and to talk books, but also, yeah, to discover new stuff. Like I had discovered this here, this book, Transcript by Heimrad Bakker. It's like a found poetry thing about based on like Nazi documents during the Second World War. And this was somebody on Booktube recommended this, and I picked it up, and it's probably my favorite like book of the year so far. So yeah, check out some Booktube videos when you get a chance.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for the recommendation there as well. So you are, of course, an active booktuber, and something that you did that really captured my attention, and I thought it was amazing. In 2018, you went to the former Soviet nation of Latvia to explore that country's literary scene. what was that experience like, and what really impressed you about Latvian literature?
That's a really good question, and I know we've talked as well. I need to once all of this is over, I need to come over for Canadian Literature Week or whatever the event was. But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I was super lucky. So the timing of this was just about right because I'd not long been freelance, I think, and I got an email out of the blue again because of my book blog from it was the British Council in Latvia, and they were having this program to basically increase the perception of Latvian literature amongst the British public. There was a specific reason for it. It was because at London Book Fair that year, the Baltics were like the market focused countries. So Latvia being one of the Baltics was trying to promote themselves. So like super last minute, about 5 days before I went out, they emailed me, asked me if I wanted to go, and they put me up in a hotel and flew me out there and took me over for like 2-3 days of like this tour of the city. We went to they have a national library where they have something called the People's Bookshelf, where visiting dignitaries can donate copies of books to the library. I mean, there's so much cool stuff about Latvia. So when they moved to this new building, the inhabitants of Riga, they formed a human chain to move the books from the old library to the new library. And it was like, I think, minus 18 degrees Celsius snow. And like they have a really rich kind of literary culture. They have one of like the largest collection of folk songs in the world, like Latvian folk songs. And there's like a UNESCO World Heritage during Soviet occupation, the poets used to be night watchmen because they loved the work, the solitude. They'd just be up there all night, nothing happening, and they'd just be writing their poetry. But obviously there was the problem with poetry is that if you wrote anything criticizing the Soviet Union, you were likely to, get shipped off to Siberia. It's a fascinating country as well. So the year I went was 2018. Their independence was only 1918, so they were celebrating 100 years as a country. And in between, they'd been occupied by the Soviets, then the Germans, then the Soviets again during the Second World War. And so, yeah, it was just fascinating to learn like the history of the country, but also a lot of the resilience and stuff. And now, like, in terms of, I would say, like, per capita or whatever, per head of the population, they have a really thriving art scene. Like, not just, actually poetry is like one of the most popular things above fiction, really. But like arts and stuff, they have a lot of animators, like movies coming out and all this stuff. So yeah, it was really cool to see just what was going on over there. And again, I brought a load of books back with me too, so yeah, it was cool.
Awesome. Yeah, one book that I've tried to track down from watching your Booktube there about the Latvia experience, because I'm a big metalhead, is...
I know what one you're talking about. Yeah. As soon as you said one book, you're talking about Doom 94 by Yanis Jonevs, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to track it down. I tried to get a copy from the UK and from Abe Books, but they refunded it and said they couldn't ship it.
Right, yeah.
Hopefully I can find one once this is all over with and all of that. So one of many things that you're really wonderful at is promoting yourself really well to readers. And that's vital today for authors to promote themselves. And I would argue that from an independent author right the way up to like a middle ground publisher, it's really important to promote yourself. And that's really important to connect with readers, of course. So what one piece of advice would you give to people watching today who may be aspiring writers on how to promote themselves?
Well, actually, probably either start a book blog or a Booktube channel would be up there, just because you get so many opportunities. So actually, my first book, No Rest for the Wicked, that was published through Booktuber. They're actually no longer active, unfortunately, but that kind of got me into the industry. And actually, from there, another small publisher picked up No Rest for the Wicked. But I discovered them because of their vice president of community management, Jesse James Freeman. He reached out to me through my book blog and, was offering me a few different book trope books. And I think I read like 2 or 3 of them, and I was really, really impressed by like the quality of them. And like, actually for me, it was the cover design and the interior layout. I was just very impressed by that. And so, yeah, from there, I actually managed to learn to do a lot of that stuff myself and a lot of the, the publishing process. Again, we mentioned editors earlier. Like if you're self-publishing, work with an editor. You know how like self-publishing has kind of a bad name for having like a lot of rubbish? most of the rubbish is from people who haven't worked with an editor. So, and again, the most of the ones that are known for, it has a reputation for poor cover design. It's because people didn't work with cover designers. So, yeah, I just think if you're going to spend a year plus working on a book, it's so worth it to work with an editor and a cover designer just to get it just right. Other than that, really, in terms of, I guess, like people starting out, is just have fun. There are rules, but there also aren't rules. Don't obsess too much about, I don't know, going a particular route. So you kind of have to take things as they come. So a lot of people will want to maybe find an agent and go a traditional publishing route and get published through Random House, which if you want to pursue that, that's fine. But maybe you also should think about simultaneously querying smaller publishers, or if you do get a chance, opportunity somewhere, just take it. Because, it's like a crazy road. And also, I would say, like, once you publish your first book, it kind of goes even crazier from there, because then you've kind of got to keep the momentum going. You've got to release new books. And, when you're releasing your first book, you'll probably find that you'll get a lot of support from friends and family, because it's super exciting. Their loved one has just released a new book. But when you're releasing book number 6 or 7, they sort of maybe aren't as interested as much. But also, you kind of accumulate people. So I have people who I know now who, like, each time I have a new book, they'll message me straight away. So I can kind of cater. I'll have like 30, 40 copies printed or whatever, knowing these people are going to ask for one. So on the one hand, you sort of have the problem of trying to convince people that you're still relevant and that you're still, they should buy your 7th book, your 8th book, your 9th book. But on the other hand, you then have pressure from people who've read your first half a dozen and who are really looking forward to your book. But, you'd better make it good for them. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but it's a nice problem to have.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. So we'll open it up to viewer questions now. But while you're typing those out, I'll just take a moment to inform you that links to Dane's work and to Dane's Booktube channel on YouTube are in the description of this live video. So please do go and support Dane's work. We do have one question that's already typed out here from Ollie Jacobs.
Okay.
What would you recommend for those who can't afford editors and designers?
Well, that's a good question. There are options out there. So, as I mentioned, Booktube earlier, unfortunately, they're no longer a platform. But what they were good at is they were like sort of a marketplace where different people could sort of swap skills, and you'd earn percentages. So one thing to do could maybe to offer somebody a percentage cut of sales on your book. Although, to be honest, most people don't take that. I personally wouldn't. But the other option, again, if you're a writer and you've got writer friends, ideally you want to work with somebody who is like a full-blown editor, but even just having another writer read through it, give it a bit of a proofread for you, and maybe share some of their suggestions, that can help. If you can, and I think Ollie might have done this himself here and there, if you can get beta readers, they can kind of replace proofreaders. So, if you've got a half dozen friends and family or whatever who really want to read your book, maybe they can read it before you get it printed, just to make sure there are no errors. Or, one classic example I made in the first edition of Driven was James Lightfold drove off somewhere on his motorbike, and then when he arrived at his destination, he was climbing out of the back of a taxi, and I'd missed it. My editor had missed it, and I didn't use beta readers. And about the third person who read it said, you do realize that this is like a bit of a continuity problem. So, I would also say I think editing is probably more important than cover design. I know people say, like, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. People kind of do, but I'll more than happily get over a bad cover and even like bad layout and all of this stuff, as long as the premise sounds good and that, like, it's not riddled with spelling mistakes, basically. So, yeah, ask a friend, if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I can add to this and attest to, with also being a published author, is that I'm not sure if this is available in the UK, but we have Arts Board funding here in Saskatchewan and in other provinces of Canada that people can apply to. So really go on Google. All of the information is for free on how to really make a good application. and apply to your local arts board, because they may actually be able to help you with funds for an editor and stuff like that, which is another platform to pursue, of course. We've got another question here from Elaine. Love the interview. I noticed you were reading Station 11. Will you be forever haunted by the plane permanently parked on the tarmac, as I will be?
I mean, that's a powerful image. Yeah, I don't know if that's the. So it's funny what sticks with you in books, isn't it? I've seen people like talk about like the stand as well, and say like specific parts of the stand really stuck with them. And like one of my friends was saying it was like one of the characters in the stand gets pregnant, and I'd completely forgotten about it, and then reread it, and I was like, oh yeah, I can see why that would stick with you, especially if if you're a woman and you've had kids. But yeah, I don't know if it's the image of the plane that will stick with me. What really stuck with me on this reading was one of the main characters. He's got a bit of advance warning that this super flu is about to hit, and he goes panic buying. And at some point, he filled up an entire trolley with toilet paper. And just reading that now, I was like, this is like eerily close to the bone that like she predicted that specific behavior as well. So I think that might be what sticks with me from that one.
Yeah, and a good shout out to a Canadian author there as well, Emily Mandel. Is that Emily?
Yeah, Emily St. John Mandel.
Yeah, that's it. Yes, and that was I believe that won one of the Canadian awards, maybe the Governor General's. Haven't got the.
It won quite a few.
Yeah, but
I think on the front it said it had won something, and it was some award that I recognised. But I mean, I don't really do book awards as well, so it's funny actually. I've always said that the way that book awards kind of impact my reading, it's not that a book will win an award and I'll think, oh, I should read that book, it won an award. It's that a book will win an award, loads of other people will read it because it won the award, and then I'll read it because the other people made it sound good. So so they have this like weird indirect impact on my reading patterns, I think.
And we've got another question here from Ollie Jacobs. A couple of questions actually. So first one, what do you prefer writing, prose, poetry, or script?
Oh, it does depend. I would probably say prose. I mean, you could then break that up into fiction and non-fiction as well. I would say probably with me, it actually depends on the idea, because sometimes it's like pulling teeth. And I'm sure Ollie will know this as a writer as well. And actually, I think he also does a little bit of what I do, where you have so many ideas going at any one time where you might have some project and it's just killing you to write it. So you kind of switch out and do something else for a bit. So I don't think it's necessarily that I prefer doing prose over poetry, or that I prefer screenplays, for example. But if the idea is good, then it's the idea that will carry it, and it doesn't really matter what the format is. I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is probably not poetry, because it's not as long, basically. So, you can get with a novel, especially if you get in the flow of things, you can have like 2-3 weeks where it just feels like everything you're touching is turning into gold. Whereas if you were writing poems, you'd write a good poem, and then you kind of have to stop for a bit and then start again. So, I think just anything, it's maybe not even the form, it's just anything that's longer form in scope. Doesn't matter whether it's a screenplay, fiction, non-fiction. I like to have something I can get my teeth stuck into.
Awesome. And another question here from Ollie. If your writing was a cocktail, what would it be, or what would be the ingredients?
Oh, that's a really good one. I don't even really do cocktails. I mean, I suppose, actually, it probably does it. This shows my familiarity with cocktails. Does a Jaeger bomb count? Can I have a Jaeger bomb? Mainly because I guess it sort of speeds you up and slows you down at the same time. It's like an explosive mixture of stuff that's probably bad for you but feels really good at the time.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So that looks like all of the questions for today. So I've got to be honest, Dane, this has been a wonderful experience, and I've really enjoyed doing this interview. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in live.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll see you all soon.
Like, share, subscribe.